My name is Alyssa Roberts and I'm 26 years old. 8 months ago, my mother gave away my car, the crossover my grandmother had gifted me for my 26th birthday. She handed the keys to my sister and told me Morgan needs it more. You're single. Lyft is more convenient for you. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just watched my car disappear from my life like I never mattered. Then came Grandma Evelyn's 75th birthday party. I showed up in a Lyft. 50 family members watched me walk through those restaurant doors empty-handed. When Grandma asked where my car was, my mom smiled that same smile and repeated those same words in front of everyone. What happened next made every person in that room realize they had severely underestimated both me and my grandmother. Before I continue, if you're curious about how this story ends, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of content. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now let me take you back to where it all started, to the exact moment I realized I was a ghost in my own home. Growing up, I was always the invisible one. My family wasn't large, just my parents, my older sister Morgan and me. Dad worked as an accountant, forever burying his head in numbers and avoiding conflict. Mom stayed home until we were in junior high, then took a part-time job at a real estate office. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't struggling either. It was a perfectly normal middle-class suburban life on the outside. But inside our walls, the air always felt different to me. Morgan was 5 years older than me. She had Mom's bright blonde hair, Mom's sparkling green eyes, Mom's loud room-filling laugh. People always smiled and said they could be twins. I took after Dad's side of the family. I had darker hair, a much quieter demeanor, and a tendency to observe the room rather than participate in it. From the very beginning, Morgan was the blazing sun. I was just the quiet shadow she cast. When we were little kids, if Morgan wanted my favorite toy, Mom wouldn't tell her no. Instead, she would kneel down, look me in the eye and say, "Alyssa, share with your sister, you're more flexible." I didn't just hear that word. I breathed it in until it became my whole identity. I remember being 10 years old, sitting on my bedroom floor, packing my tiny childhood belongings into rough cardboard boxes. I watched through blurry eyes as Mom cheerfully held up beautiful new floral curtains for Morgan's room, the bigger bedroom that used to be mine. Mom completely ignored the hot tears streaming down my face. If Morgan needed the bigger space, Mom always had a smooth explanation ready. "Morgan has more friends over. You understand, right, sweetie?" If Morgan's activities ever conflicted with mine, guess whose schedule got cancelled? Mine. I don't matter, I would think, swallowing the heavy lump in my throat. I learned incredibly early that flexible was just a polite code word for expendable. By the time I turned 22, I had quietly built my own life from the ground up. I worked hard as a freelance content writer. It was remote work, but it paid well enough to cover my apartment, my bills, and my precious independence. But because I didn't commute to a shiny office every morning, Mom flat out refused to consider it a real job. "When are you getting a proper career?" she'd ask, her tone dripping with pity at every single family dinner. "Morgan has a handsome husband, a baby on the way. What do you have?" Morgan married David Carter at 27 and had little Evan at 28. She effortlessly lived the exact life Mom had carefully blueprinted for both of us. I was just the messy rough draft that never got published. Looking back, I realized that being flexible meant I was supposed to bend until I broke, just to keep them happy. Years of this treatment made my heart heavy and numb. I thought nothing could ever shift the balance of power in our house. And that car, my 26th birthday forest green crossover, was supposed to be the ultimate apology. It was supposed to change absolutely everything. But it didn't change my family. It just exposed exactly how far they were willing to go to break me. The second warning sign flashed a full year before the disastrous birthday party. Grandma Evelyn had been living completely alone in her big echoing house ever since Grandpa passed away. She was 75 years old, her mind as sharp as a newly forged blade, but the rest of the family still worried about her safety. Eventually, someone floated the idea of her moving much closer to us. Mom, naturally, seized total control immediately. She organized a grand family meeting, which meant assembling herself, Dad, Morgan, and David around our parents' polished mahogany dining table. They didn't even think to invite me. Was I not blood? Was I not family? I found out about this vital gathering exactly 4 days later, long after all the important decisions were locked firmly into place. We talked about Grandma. Mom mentioned casually during a rushed Tuesday phone call, treating the life-altering news like a boring weather update. Morgan's going to check on her 3 times a month. David will expertly handle any pesky repairs at her place. I gripped the receiver tightly, holding my breath. I waited patiently for my specific assignment. It never came. The silence on the line stretched out, heavy and suffocating. What about me? I finally forced the words past my lips. I work from home. I have the freest schedule. I could easily help with, "Oh sweetie, you're so incredibly busy with your little computer thing." Mom's voice dripped with condescending dismissal. "Let Morgan handle it. She's just better with people anyway." Better with people. The phrase stung like a physical slap. Right. Because I'm just a machine typing in the dark. What Mom absolutely didn't know was that I had been secretly video calling Grandma every single Saturday morning for 3 solid years, while Morgan's highly praised 3 times a month visits lasted 45 hurried minutes max. Grandma and I would talk for hours. We laughed about Grandpa's terrible jokes, discussed the vibrant blooms in her garden, and debated the plots of thick mystery books she was devouring. Once during a particularly long call, she leaned close to her webcam and said something I didn't truly grasp at the time. "You remind me so much of your grandfather, Alyssa." Her voice was impossibly soft, thoughtful, quiet, but you see everything. I nervously laughed it off then. I really shouldn't have. Because Grandma saw absolutely everything too. She witnessed every single phone call where Mom loudly talked right over me. She noticed every festive holiday where Morgan's growing family swallowed the entire spotlight. She tracked every tiny cutting cruelty perfectly disguised as practicality. She was silently watching, patiently waiting, and she was the one solitary person in my entire family I had completely underestimated. My 26th birthday arrived. A day I fully expected to be entirely forgettable. Honestly, I'd stopped expecting much of anything from my relatives. A generic drugstore card, maybe a forced dinner if Mom felt unusually generous. The bar was buried underground, yet somehow they constantly found creative ways to trip right over it. But that specific year was shockingly different. Mom called 2 weeks beforehand. "Come to the house this Sunday. We have something very special for you." I almost didn't go. I almost fabricated a desperate excuse about strict work deadlines. Why bother? It'll just be another letdown. But a weird, unusual warmth in her tone sparked a tiny, foolish flame of curiosity in my chest. The entire clan was present when I hesitantly walked up the driveway. Mom, Dad, Morgan, David, and squirming baby Evan. And there it sat. Parked proudly on the concrete, wrapped tightly in a giant glossy red bow, was a stunning forest green Toyota RAV4 crossover. I instantly stopped breathing. The world spun. "Happy birthday, Alyssa," Mom cheered, stepping forward and handing me a set of shiny keys. She beamed widely, looking exactly like she had just personally invented the concept of generosity. "We wanted you to finally have reliable transportation." I clearly remember my hands violently shaking as my fingers curled around the cold metal. Morgan had joyfully gotten her first brand new car at 23, right after her college graduation. I was now 26, and had been stubbornly taking crowded buses and expensive lifts for years. I had long ago stopped expecting equity. I had stopped expecting love to look fair. But here it is, my heart pounded against my ribs. Proof that maybe, just maybe, I actually matter. Grandma Evelyn stood quietly by the edge of the garage, watching the spectacle unfold. When our eyes met across the yard, she offered a smile. It wasn't her usual sweet grandmotherly grin. This was something vastly deeper, a fierce, knowing look. "Your grandmother really wanted you to have a safe car," Mom added, tossing the detail in almost as a careless afterthought. She thought it was finally time. I didn't catch the massive hidden significance of those words right then. God, I really should have. That beautiful green crossover wasn't just a convenient mode of transportation, it was a lifeline. It marked the very first time in 26 years that I truly felt visible, openly acknowledged and validated. I felt like a real human being who existed in this family beyond merely playing Morgan's fading shadow. I proudly drove that Toyota absolutely everywhere for 11 glorious months. I blasted my favorite music, built happy memories within its metal walls, and made that space completely mine, my safe haven. Then Morgan's fancy station wagon suddenly broke down, and the fragile illusion of my newfound worth shattered into a million jagged, unfixable pieces. Exactly 4 weeks before Grandma's grand 75th birthday, I drove over to my parents' house for our mandatory Sunday dinner. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint, smoky scent of autumn leaves. Pulling up, I spotted Morgan's silver station wagon sitting heavily in the driveway, looking exactly as it always did. I proudly parked my beautiful crossover right behind hers, killing the engine with a satisfied sigh. My car, my freedom. I walked inside, pushing through the back door and heading straight for the kitchen. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, Mom suddenly spun around from the island counter. Her elbow jerked, knocking a massive glass pitcher of dark iced tea violently forward. A freezing tidal wave splashed all over the front of my favorite beige dress. "Alyssa, look what you made me do," she snapped, instantly flipping the blame. Go upstairs and change into my old clothes right now. Did she do that on purpose? The thought flashed hot in my mind, but I quickly shoved it down. I rushed up the carpeted stairs, spending 20 frustrating minutes scrubbing sticky syrup off my skin and wriggling into an oversized, scratchy sweater. When I finally came back down, something urged me to glance out the side window to check on my vehicle. The driveway space behind Morgan's wagon was totally empty. Panic spiked in my chest. I darted toward the attached garage. Pushing the heavy fire door open, I stared into the dim space where Dad's old coupe usually lived. I saw something that made my stomach drop like a heavy stone, my forest green crossover. The shiny red ribbon was long gone, but the shape was unmistakable. I stepped closer, my breath hitching. Peering through the rear window, I saw Evan's bulky, expensive car seat already strapped tightly into the back row. They installed a baby seat in 20 minutes? No, this was planned. My heart hammered frantically against my ribs. I practically ran back into the kitchen. I found Mom calmly stirring a bubbling pot on the stove, the savory scent of her famous roast filling the room like a thick, choking fog. Wait, how did it get in the garage? I panicked, my voice trembling. Mom, why is my car locked inside your garage? She didn't even bother to look up from her cooking. Oh, Morgan needed to borrow it. Her tired wagon is finally in the shop. But I just drove it here, I protested, stepping closer. It runs perfectly. It was blocking the driveway, Mom said smoothly, her tone eerily flat. So I took your keys from your purse and moved it out of the way. She dug through my bag. The sheer violation made my skin crawl. You can't just take my property. Just for a couple of days, honey. Her mechanic said it could take 10 days to fix. Then give me the keys back immediately. I'm leaving right now, I demanded, holding out a shaking hand. Mom let out a long, overly dramatic sigh, finally turning to face me. Alyssa, please stop shouting. I thoroughly checked your tires when I moved it. They look dangerously bald, and your engine sounded absolutely terrible. It is simply not safe for you to drive anywhere tonight. Morgan will keep it safe until we get it properly checked by a professional. The lies poured out of her mouth like smooth, poisonous honey. I desperately wanted to scream, to argue that she was making up insane excuses, but right at that second, Morgan breezed into the room, balancing little Evan easily on her hip. Instantly, the tense moment completely dissolved. Mom switched to high-pitched baby talk, turning her back on me to focus on dinner preparations. I sank into a dining chair, completely ignored, invisible once again. 10 minutes later, as I sat paralyzed by shock, I overheard a hushed, furious whispering coming from the darkened hallway. I crept closer. Yes, Mrs. Carter, I assure you Evan will be perfectly safe. Mom hissed proudly into her cell phone. Morgan has a brand new top-of-the-line crossover now. We would never let your precious grandson ride around in that tacky, dangerous old wagon. My blood instantly ran ice cold. David's mother, Mrs. Carter, the incredibly wealthy, deeply judgmental mother-in-law who had been making cruel, snide comments regarding Morgan's struggling lifestyle for several months. The crushing truth slammed into me. Mom hadn't borrowed my car for safety or necessity. She had coldly stolen it. She sacrificed my only source of independence purely to buy fake status for her golden child. And as I stood freezing in that dark hallway, I realized they had absolutely no intention of ever giving my keys back. 10 agonizing days dragged by. My driveway remained painfully empty. Then 3 full weeks vanished. Nothing. I finally broke and texted Morgan. Hey, any update on your wagon? Need my car back soon. Her casual reply landed 24 hours later. Mechanic says another 10 days. Thanks for understanding. Understanding. I wasn't understanding. I was suffocating. I dialed Mom's number, my pulse thrumming frantically against my throat. When am I getting my vehicle back? I demanded the second she answered. Alyssa, please don't be difficult. Her tone immediately shifted, freezing over like thin winter ice. Morgan has a growing child. She desperately needs reliable transportation. You just work from home. You can simply take a lift. That's completely beside the point. It is mine. It's just a piece of metal, Alyssa. Don't be so terribly materialistic. Mom sighed heavily, playing the exhausted peacemaker. Your sister needs it more right now. You're single. You're flexible. You understand, right? There it was. That cursed word again. Flexible. It tasted like poison on my tongue. Mom, I never agreed to "we will discuss this later," she snapped, cutting the line dead. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like a mocking laugh. This wasn't harmless borrowing anymore. This was daylight robbery delivered with a polite smile. The next morning I called Morgan directly. Morgs, we need to talk about my RAV4. What about it? She sounded mildly annoyed, distracted by Evan crying loudly in the background. It's been 3 long weeks. I need my keys. Silence stretched over the phone. Well, Mom said I could keep using it. I assumed you were totally fine with the arrangement. No one ever bothered to ask me if I was fine with it. I mean, you don't really need it, right? You just type at your desk all day. I gripped my cell so intensely the glass screen protector nearly cracked. Morgan, that doesn't matter. It belongs to me. I should have been given a choice. Look, Alyssa, I have a wild 4-year-old. Her voice turned razor sharp, weaponizing her motherhood. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to haul him to daycare, to endless doctor appointments? I know your life is hard, but you're being horribly dramatic. It's just a car. Then give it back. More awful silence. Mom said we can sort this mess out at Grandma's birthday dinner. We'll talk then. Click. My hands shook with pure, unfiltered rage. No vehicle. No texts. The anger wasn't quietly simmering in my chest anymore. It was rapidly boiling over. Suddenly a desperate thought hit me. I snatched up my phone and opened the Toyota Connected Services app. The digital GPS tracker buffered, then loaded. A tiny red dot blinked brightly on the map. It wasn't sitting at a dusty repair shop. It was parked right at a local auto dealership. My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. I ordered a rideshare instantly. 10 agonizing minutes later, I was sprinting frantically across the sun-baked dealership lot. I ducked hard behind a row of shiny sedans when I spotted them through the massive glass windows. Mom and Morgan. They were aggressively arguing with a bewildered sales manager. The vehicle is my daughter's, Mom insisted, slapping a hand on his desk. We need to legally transfer the title into her name today. The manager firmly shook his head. Ma'am, the official title is securely registered to an Evelyn Miller. Without her direct signature, you absolutely cannot transfer anything. They were trying to legally steal it. My vision blurred with hot tears. I didn't storm inside. I couldn't. Instead, I hid around the brick corner, trembling, and dialed Grandma's number. Grandma? I choked out, fighting a sob. They're trying to transfer the title. Grandma remained dead silent for 3 heavy seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was absolute, terrifying ice. Go straight home, Alyssa. Say absolutely nothing to them. Let me handle this. Sitting alone in my dark apartment later, staring blindly at the wall, a crushing realization squeezed my lungs. If I stayed silent now, this nightmare would happen again and again. Whenever Morgan desired something, Mom would happily volunteer my resources, my precious time, my personal space, my entire life. I would be flexible forever. I decided right then. I would confront Mom at the upcoming party, privately, calmly. I didn't want a massive war. I just craved basic human respect. But Mom, I would soon learn, had completely different, deeply public plans for me. Earlier that week she had texted, "Dinner is exactly at 8 p.m. Don't be late." I was peacefully steaming my sapphire blue dress at 6:30 p.m. when my phone buzzed violently. A text from cousin Leo, Aunt Penelope's sharp-witted son. He was the only relative who constantly saw straight through Mom's toxic garbage. "Where the hell are you?" Leo wrote. Mom loudly told everyone dinner started at 7 p.m. "She's already making grand speeches to the whole room about how you're always late and clearly don't care about this family. Get here now." Panic seized my throat like a vice. 8 p.m. was a deliberate trap. She desperately wanted me to stroll in late so she could completely control the false narrative. I threw the dress on, snatched my purse, and ordered another car. The driver practically flew down the darkening highway, but the cruel clock kept ticking. 6:45, 7:10. My heart lodged firmly in my throat. The day of Grandma Evelyn's milestone 75th birthday featured perfect, golden autumn weather. The Crestview was one of those elite restaurants that quietly whispered old money, crisp white tablecloths, glowing crystal chandeliers, and waiters who glided around like silent ghosts. Mom had arrogantly reserved the grand private dining room for 50 guests. Extended relatives, distant cousins I hadn't seen in decades, aunts and uncles. The rideshare dropped me off right at the grand entrance. I nervously smoothed down my silk dress, took a deep shuddering breath, and walked toward the heavy oak doors. That's exactly when I saw it. My beautiful forest green crossover, parked carelessly 4 spots from the main doors. A bright yellow baby on board sticker, one I certainly never purchased, was plastered permanently onto the rear window. Morgan and David were just climbing out of the front seats. Little Evan squirmed unhappily in David's arms, fussing loudly about his tiny restrictive bow tie. Morgan suddenly spotted me frozen on the pavement. She waved brightly, acting like absolutely nothing was wrong in the world. "Alyssa, you look so great," she called out cheerily. "Did you take a lift?" I forced a fake, painful smile that felt exactly like chewing broken glass. "Convenient, right?" I managed to croak. "So convenient," she agreed blindly, entirely missing the razor-sharp edge in my voice. Or maybe she just genuinely didn't care. We should head in. Mom's been stressing over the seating chart all morning. David gave me a brief, deeply awkward nod, refusing to meet my eyes, and they headed inside the building. Evan's sharp whining echoed off the cold parking lot concrete. I stood there completely alone for a long moment, staring blankly at my stolen car. The safe space I'd built memories inside, the metal proof that I actually existed in this twisted family. Now it was utterly decorated with someone else's tacky sticker, someone else's bulky car seat, someone else's entire life. I finally turned and walked into that fancy restaurant, knowing deep in my bones I'd have to say something tonight. I would pull Mom aside, confront her quietly, and get this nightmare resolved. I had absolutely no idea she had already been loudly talking to everyone. I was walking straight into a brutal ambush, completely blind to the devastating trap closing around me. The grand private dining room buzzed with loud, happy conversation and the polite clinking of expensive crystal glasses. Warm golden light spilled from the chandeliers above, painting a picture-perfect family gathering. Grandma Evelyn sat proudly at the head of the long, polished rectangular table, looking incredibly elegant in a deep navy blue dress. Her silver hair was neatly swept back from her face. At 75 years old, she still possessed the perfect straight posture of a classical dancer and sharp eyes that absolutely missed nothing. I found my assigned seat, predictably shoved all the way at the very far end of the room, squeezed next to distant cousins I barely even knew. Typical, I thought, staring at my empty plate. Keep the shadow in the corner. The first 2 agonizing hours slowly passed in a blur of forced small talk and fancy, bite-sized appetizers. Uncle Richard stood up and delivered a touching, tearful toast. Aunt Penelope warmly shared hilarious childhood stories about Grandma that made everyone erupt into genuine laughter. I quietly chewed my food, my stomach tied in tight, painful knots, dreading the inevitable moment I would have to pull Mom aside. Then, right during the main course, the atmosphere violently shifted. Grandma looked down the length of the table, her gaze locking directly onto me. "Alyssa, sweetheart." Her clear voice easily cut through the noisy chatter. "I noticed you arrived completely alone tonight. Where's that beautiful green car we got you for your birthday?" 50 heads instantly whipped around to stare my way. My throat closed up. Before I could even open my mouth to form a single syllable, Mom's loud, overly cheerful voice rang out from across the room. "Oh, Alyssa generously gave it to Morgan." Mom beamed brightly, looking around like she was happily announcing a massive charity donation to the press. "Morgan has little Evan, you know. She desperately needed reliable transportation for the baby." She turned to the older relatives seated nearby, her fake smile widening. "Alyssa is so incredibly understanding. She knows her big sister needs it much more. We're all so proud of how selfless and giving she's become." Low murmurs of deep approval rippled rapidly through the crowded room. How sweet. Such a wonderfully good sister. Family always helps family. My stomach violently twisted. I sat completely frozen in my seat, my silver fork suspended awkwardly halfway to my open mouth. A heavy, sickening wave of dizziness washed over me. Mom had just flawlessly rewritten reality in front of 50 people. I didn't give away a single thing. I was ruthlessly robbed in slow motion, and now I was being publicly applauded for my own mugging. But Grandma's sharp eyes hadn't left my pale face. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "You gave it away, Alyssa." Her voice was steady, way too calm. Or was it taken? The approving murmurs instantly stopped dead. You could hear a pin drop. Mom's glowing smile severely flickered for just a fraction of a second, and I felt the entire energy of the room rapidly shift into high gear. "Mom," Laura laughed, a high, nervous, grating sound. What a ridiculous question. Of course Alyssa gave it up willingly. She's not a selfish child. Grandma didn't chuckle. She didn't even blink. Instead, she set down her fork with slow, deliberate precision against her porcelain plate. Clink. "I am asking Alyssa, not you, Laura." Every single side conversation instantly died. The heavy silence was deafening. 50 pairs of curious, shocked eyes bounced rapidly between my grandmother and me, watching us like tense spectators at a championship tennis match. I swallowed hard, my mouth bone-dry. My heart pounded so violently against my ribs, I was entirely sure everyone could hear the frantic thumping. I looked at Mom's furious, silent warning glare. I looked at Morgan's terrified, frozen expression. Finally, I looked back at Grandma's steady, encouraging gaze. "No one asked me," I finally whispered. Then I took a breath, and my voice grew much stronger. "I was told Morgan was simply borrowing it for 10 days while hers was fixed. That was exactly 4 weeks ago." 4 weeks, Grandma repeated softly, letting the awful truth hang in the air. "I tried to get it back," I continued, the buried anger finally spilling out. Mom said Morgan needed it more because she has a real family. Because I'm just single. I paused, feeling the old wounds rip wide open. Because I'm flexible. The dining room had gone completely horrifyingly silent. Mom practically leaped up, her wooden chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. This is just a tiny silly family matter, everyone. Nothing to worry about at all. Small. Grandma's voice cut through the air like a jagged blade of ice. A brand new vehicle worth $35,000 is a small matter. Someone loudly gasped. I think it was Aunt Penelope. Mom's face rapidly drained of all color, turning a sickly pale white. Mother, can we please discuss this privately? Mom pleaded, her confident armor finally cracking. You made it public, Laura, Grandma replied, her eyes never once wavering. You proudly announced to this entire crowded room that Alyssa willingly gave away her birthday gift. If that is a bold-faced lie, it should be corrected in the exact same room. I stared at Grandma. I really looked at her for the very first time that night. This wasn't the fragile, sweet old woman who gently baked chocolate chip cookies and told soft stories about the past. This was a fierce, unstoppable force of nature. Someone who had been quietly watching, carefully gathering evidence, and patiently waiting in the shadows. Her moment for absolute justice had finally arrived, and she was about to burn Mom's entire kingdom to the ground. Grandma turned to face my mother fully. Her movements were unhurried, perfectly controlled, radiating a terrifying authority. Laura, let me ask you something. She folded her wrinkled hands neatly on the white tablecloth. Do you remember coming to me last year, right before Alyssa's birthday? Mom's jaw tightened so hard I genuinely thought her teeth might crack. Mother, this isn't the appropriate time. Do you remember what you specifically asked me for? Absolute, suffocating silence fell over the banquet. The clinking of expensive crystal completely stopped. Uncle Richard shifted uncomfortably in his padded seat, clearly sensing the incoming storm. Aunt Penelope leaned forward, her brow deeply furrowed in confusion. You begged me for money, Grandma continued, her firm voice carrying to every single darkened corner of the private room. From the family trust fund. You cried and said you desperately wanted to buy Alyssa a car for her 26th birthday. A proper expensive gift, you claimed, to finally show her she truly mattered. She begged for money, to show I mattered. My breath completely caught in my burning throat. But she didn't mean a single word of it. Mom's face had gone from a sickly pale to an ashen, ghostly gray. You said, and I remember this clearly, Laura, you said you wanted to do something exceptionally special for your younger daughter, because you knew she often felt entirely overlooked. Grandma's wise eyes hardened into twin stones. Those were your exact pleading words. Frantic whispers immediately erupted around the long table. I saw distant cousins exchanging wild, shocked glances. David was staring down at his half-eaten steak like he passionately wished the polished floor would just swallow him whole. So tell me now. Grandma leaned forward slightly, closing her invisible trap. What did you formally promise me in exchange for that large sum of cash? Mother, please stop. Mom hissed, her perfect composure finally shattering into pieces. What did you swear to me? Mom's lips pressed into a harsh, thin line. She looked frantically around the giant room at her older siblings, at her judging nieces and nephews, at the 50 stunned witnesses to her public unraveling. She said absolutely nothing. Aunt Penelope spoke up softly, breaking the heavy tension. Laura, what on earth is she talking about? I watched my mother violently struggle to find an escape route. For the absolute first time in my entire existence, I saw her stripped completely bare, completely without her thick armor of arrogance and control, and a heartbreaking realization hit me. The car wasn't just a loving gift from my parents. It never had been. It was an illusion. I'll gladly tell you what she promised. Grandma's voice rang out, steady as pure steel. She swore that green crossover would forever belong to Alyssa. Only Alyssa. She even signed a legal paper explicitly saying so. The room instantly erupted in shocked, overlapping murmurs. Mom's face contorted into an ugly, desperate mask. That silly paper was it was merely a standard formality for the trust records. The official title of that car, Grandma sharply interrupted, cutting her daughter off completely, is firmly locked in my name. Not yours, Laura. Not even Alyssa's. Mine. Simply because I paid every single penny for it. I felt like the solid ground had violently dropped out from right under my heels. What? The breathless word escaped my trembling lips before I could stop it. Grandma looked gently at me, and her fierce expression softened beautifully for just a fleeting moment. I genuinely wanted to give you something wonderfully meaningful, my sweet girl, but I know exactly how your mother operates behind closed doors. She snapped her terrifying gaze back to Laura. So I purposely kept the official title in my name. And I made your mother sign a binding agreement stating the vehicle was exclusively for you. Morgan jumped up suddenly, her heavy chair nearly toppling backward onto the carpet. Wait, Grandma, I swear I didn't know any of this. Mom told me Alyssa was completely fine with. Did you ask her yourself? Grandma's pointed questions sliced through Morgan's loud protests like a sharpened butcher knife. Did you ever call your little sister, dial her number and simply ask if you could take her only vehicle? Morgan's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, gasping like a stranded fish. Mom said. You didn't ask. Grandma nodded slowly, a deep sadness mixing with her fiery wrath. You selfishly assumed. You greedily took. Just exactly like you were carefully taught to do. David tightly grabbed Morgan's trembling arm, trying desperately to pull his weeping wife back down into her padded seat. She weakly resisted for a split second, then utterly crumpled into his chest, hiding her sobbing face. I sat frozen in my spot, silently watching my family's beautifully constructed fake narrative violently collapse in real time. Grandma had known everything from the very start. She had brilliantly prepared. She had patiently waited for the perfect moment to strike, and looking at the terrifyingly calm fire burning in her eyes, I realized the ultimate punishment hadn't even started yet. Richard, Grandma called out to my uncle, her tone slicing through the thick, panicked air. Did you bring exactly what I asked for? My heart completely stopped. The air vanished from my lungs. Mom moved fast, driven by pure, unadulterated desperation. Before Uncle Richard could even open his mouth to respond, she physically stepped away from her tall wooden chair. She raised both hands high in a fake calming gesture, desperately trying to herd the shocked crowd back into her carefully constructed pen. Everyone please. Her voice had abruptly shifted. It was soothing now, deeply reasonable, coating her rising panic in sweet sugar. Let's not wildly blow this out of proportion. This is just a tiny silly family disagreement about a car, that's all. A car. You mean my independence? She forcefully turned her back on Grandma, addressing the wider table. She made intense eye contact with confused aunts, bewildered uncles, and gossiping cousins. Listen, Alyssa simply works from home. She doesn't need to painfully commute every morning. Morgan, however, has a growing toddler who needs to get safely to daycare, to important doctors, to Laura. Grandma's voice rumbled like distant thunder, a dark, heavy warning. Mom completely ignored her, plowing ahead blindly. I just made a totally practical decision for my family. Morgan has massive responsibilities. Alyssa is young, single, flexible. She can easily adjust. That's simply what a loving family does. A few heads actually nodded. The blind loyalty of relatives. I clearly saw my Aunt Catherine lean over and whisper something in agreement to her husband. The sheer injustice of it burned my throat. And frankly, Mom continued, her chest puffing out as she gained false confidence. I truly don't think we need to air private messy matters in front of everyone here. This is strictly between my two daughters and me. David finally spoke up, his voice hesitant but clinging to his mother-in-law's sinking ship. I agree. This really seems like something that could be discussed much later. Later. Always later. When they can trap me alone and force me to submit. Later. Grandma laughed out loud. It was a short, sharp, terrifying sound that made the fine crystal glasses vibrate. Laura has been discussing it later for 4 solid weeks while shamelessly driving around town in a vehicle that absolutely doesn't belong to her daughter. Mother, please. Mom's fake calm was violently cracking, her voice pitching into a shrill shriek. You're embarrassing yourself. The dining room instantly went as cold as a morgue. Grandma rose slowly from her velvet seat. Even at 75, she stood impossibly tall, her shoulders pinned back, her chin lifted high like royalty facing a rebellion. I am embarrassing myself? She repeated every single word distinctly, letting them hang over the table like executioner's blades. You boldly stole from your very own child. You loudly announced your theft as a beautiful act of generosity. And I am the embarrassment? Nobody moved. Nobody even dared to breathe. I saw Aunt Penelope's shaking hand slowly cover her mouth in pure shock. Beside her, Uncle Richard was already reaching for something hidden beneath the thick white tablecloth. Mom had miscalculated. Badly. And so Mom's fragile composure finally, violently snapped. Like a cornered animal, she bared her teeth and attacked the weakest target in the room. Me. You know what? She aggressively spun toward me, jabbing an accusing finger in my direction. This is entirely your fault, Alyssa. You always do this. I flinched hard, pressing my spine against my chair. You sit there, quiet as a pathetic little mouse, and then act so deeply surprised when things don't magically go your way. Her voice rose to a hysterical scream. You never speak up, you never participate. You just sulk endlessly in dark corners, and cruelly expect everyone around you to read your mind. Laura, stop. Dad finally tried to nervously intervene, his face completely pale. No, Raymond. Someone finally needs to say it. Mom's eyes were completely wild, her makeup slightly smeared. Morgan has been carrying the heavy weight of this family for years. She has a working husband, a real child, real crushing responsibilities. Alyssa just sits at home in her pajamas, typing uselessly on her laptop, and proudly calls it a career. The vicious words hit me like physical punches to the gut. Don't cry. Please God, do not let them see you cry. Your older sister sacrifices every single day for her family. Mom roared, her chest heaving. What do you ever sacrifice, Alyssa? Nothing. You give us absolutely nothing. Hot tears burned furiously behind my eyes, stinging my vision, but I absolutely refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of 50 staring people. Not for her. Sisters help each other. Mom's voice dripped with fake righteous anger. Morgan desperately needed that car. A good sister, a real sister, would have gladly offered it without ever being asked. I would have. I heard my own shaky voice whisper into the heavy void. If someone had just bothered to ask. Don't play the pathetic victim. It doesn't suit you. Mom spat back instantly. Morgan sat perfectly frozen beside David, staring blankly at the stained tablecloth, completely paralyzed by the monster she had helped unleash. David had his protective arm tight around her, but he looked like he wanted to sprint through the nearest plate glass window. I gripped the edge of the table. I was about to stand up. I was about to walk straight out of those heavy oak doors and absolutely never look back at these people again. Then, another voice powerfully cut through the suffocating tension. Aunt Penelope was suddenly on her feet, her usually kind face flushed dark red with pure unleashed anger. I sat silently through this exact same garbage treatment when we were kids, Penelope declared, her voice ringing off the walls. I will absolutely not sit here and watch you do it to your daughter. Mom's head whipped toward her younger sister, her eyes bulging. Penelope, stay entirely out of this. No. Penelope's tone was an immovable brick wall. Not this time. Aunt Penelope bravely walked around the long table, marching directly toward my fuming mother. I was the flexible one in our childhood house. Do you remember, Laura? Her voice was remarkably steady, but it carried decades of crushing, unspoken weight. You always got the much bigger bedroom. You demanded the newer, expensive clothes. You got the later, cooler curfew. And every single time I dared to complain, Mom and Dad just told me I should be much more understanding. Mom's jaw clenched furiously. That has absolutely nothing to do with— It has absolutely everything to do with this. Penelope shouted, stopping right next to Grandma's chair. I spent painful years in therapy just learning that what constantly happened to me was never normal, and now I am watching you inflict the exact same psychological damage onto Alyssa. The grand dining room was cemetery silent. Even the waiters had completely vanished into the shadows. She's not being selfish for simply wanting her own property back. Penelope's fierce eyes swept across the stunned faces of our relatives. She's not being difficult. She's being a normal human being with basic healthy boundaries. Morgan finally looked up, her mascara visibly running. Aunt Penelope, I really didn't know. Then you should have asked her. Penelope didn't soften her gaze for a second. That is the entire point, Morgan. You should have asked. I felt something massive and heavy finally shift inside my bruised chest. I'm not crazy. For the absolute first time in my entire life, someone in my bloodline was fiercely standing up for me. Someone truly understood the pain. Grandma gently placed a wrinkled hand on Penelope's shaking arm, offering a deeply approving silent gesture. This isn't just about a stolen car anymore, Grandma announced to the room, her voice echoing with finality. This is about whether our family treats all of its members with equal respect, or only the spoiled ones who demand it the loudest. She looked warmly at me then, and I saw something glowing brightly in her ancient eyes that I had never ever noticed directed at me before. Pride. True, fierce pride. Richard, Grandma said again, her tone shifting back to strict business. The folder. This time absolutely no one dared to interrupt. Uncle Richard reached into the shadows beneath the table and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. Mom watched that beige square of paper like it was a live, ticking nuclear weapon, and as the metal clasp slowly bent open, I realized it was about to blow her entire world to absolute ashes. Okay, I need to pause my story right here for just a quick second. If you've ever been trapped in a toxic situation where your own flesh and blood talked about you like you were entirely invisible, where they casually made massive life decisions for you and expected you to just smile and accept the disrespect, I really want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Would you have finally spoken up at this breaking point, or would you have stayed frozen in your seat like I did? Also, if this emotional roller coaster is hitting home, please hit that like button. It truly helps the channel grow. Now take a deep breath. Let's dive right back into the chaos. Because trust me, Grandma's master plan wasn't even close to being finished. Uncle Richard stood up stiffly and crossed to Grandma's side of the long table. The manila envelope looked so perfectly ordinary, just plain beige paper and a cheap metal clasp, but the terrified way Mom stared at it, you would honestly think it contained the secret launch codes for a nuclear strike. Mother. Mom's voice had entirely lost its sharp, cruel edge, suddenly replaced by something uncomfortably close to begging. Whatever you are about to do, please. Not here. Not in front of everyone. Grandma calmly took the heavy envelope from Richard's shaking hands. You had every single opportunity to handle this awful mess privately, Laura. She bent the metal clasp open slowly, deliberately dragging out the agonizing tension. 4 long weeks, you could have simply returned the vehicle, offered a genuine apology, and made things right. I was going to, Mom gasped desperately. Instead, you proudly announced to 50 innocent people that Alyssa willingly gave away her birthday gift. Grandma smoothly withdrew a thick stack of folded papers. You twisted your own ugly theft into a beautiful fairy tale about your youngest daughter's fake generosity. She spread the crisp documents across the white tablecloth. So the raw truth will be told in this exact same room, to this exact same audience. I craned my aching neck to see what she had laid out. Official-looking legal papers, bearing a distinct logo I immediately recognized. The state DMV. Richard, please read the top document aloud, Grandma commanded. Uncle Richard picked up the paper, nervously adjusted his reading glasses on the bridge of his nose, and cleared his tight throat. Vehicle registration, State of Colorado. He paused, dragging his finger down to find the relevant line. Registered owner, Evelyn Miller. Loud gasps rippled rapidly through the shocked room. That's strictly for convenience. Mom stammered wildly, her eyes darting around. For smart tax purposes. Absolutely everyone does that. Do they really? Grandma's silver eyebrow arched high. Richard, continue. He flipped to the next heavy page. This appears to be some kind of binding financial agreement. He scanned the complex paragraphs quickly, his facial expression violently shifting from mild confusion to sudden understanding, and finally to something looking exactly like grim satisfaction. Read it, Grandma instructed flatly. All of it, every single word. Mom's hands are visibly shaking. She knows she's caught. There is no escape door left. I finally understood the terrifying magnitude of what was about to happen. Uncle Richard's deep voice carried easily across the dead-silent room. Family Trust Disbursement Agreement, dated April 20th of last year. He took a breath, then continued reading the legal text. I, Laura Roberts, hereby acknowledge receipt of $32,000 from the Miller Family Trust. Someone in the back sharply whispered, 32,000. Richard kept going, reading the undeniable facts. These specific funds are strictly designated for the purchase of a safe vehicle as a birthday gift for my daughter Alyssa Roberts. He looked up briefly at Mom, then returned to the devastating document. I confirm that this vehicle will be officially registered in Evelyn Miller's name, but will serve as the sole exclusive property of Alyssa Roberts for her personal use. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Grandma protected me. She knew Mom would try something. Furthermore, Richard continued loudly, I fully agree that this vehicle absolutely cannot be transferred, sold, loaned, or otherwise given to any other family member without the explicit written consent of Alyssa Roberts. He slowly lowered the paper. It's officially signed. Laura Roberts. He squinted closer. Witnessed by Richard Miller. That's me. He looked directly at Mom with profound betrayal. I blindly witnessed this for you, Laura. I remember it clearly now. You casually told me it was just routine, boring trust paperwork. Mom's face had turned the horrifying color of burnt ash. I honestly didn't think it was legal. It was just a formality. $32,000 drained from my personal trust. Grandma's voice was absolute ice. Given specifically for Alyssa's security, carrying explicit conditions you knowingly agreed to in writing. Aunt Catherine leaned over to her stunned husband. She literally signed a binding legal contract. It certainly appears so, he murmured back, utterly disgusted. Morgan was openly crying now, silent, miserable tears tracking down her ruined makeup. David still held her shoulders but kept his angry eyes glued firmly to the floor. "Do you all understand now?" Grandma addressed the entire room. This was never a shared family car that Laura could freely redistribute whenever she pleased. This was Alyssa's rightful property, generously funded by me, fully protected by a strict contract. She paused, letting the heavy truth sink in. And Laura arrogantly took it anyway. But wait, there is even more. Grandma gestured for Richard to continue digging. He slowly pulled out another single sheet. This one was lined, covered in cursive handwriting. The blue ink looked slightly faded. "This appears to be a highly personal letter of commitment." Richard examined it closely. "Also proudly signed by Laura." Mom made a pathetic, whimpering sound that reminded me of a wounded animal trapped in a snare. "Please, I don't see why I read it, Richard." He cleared his throat again and began to speak the damning words. "Dear Mother, I solemnly promise that the car purchased with your generous gift will remain Alyssa's, and Alyssa's alone. I completely understand that she has so often felt overlooked in our busy family, and I desperately want this gift to show her that she truly matters." Richard's voice cracked slightly with emotion. "I will never ever take this car away from her or allow anyone else to use it without her explicit permission. I am deeply grateful for your immense generosity and will always honor this sacred commitment. Love, your daughter Laura." She knew. My chest squeezed so hard I couldn't breathe, couldn't even form a coherent thought. My own mother wrote those beautiful, loving words. She actually acknowledged my hidden pain, promised to do so much better, and then heartlessly broke every single promise she made. "That specific letter," Grandma said incredibly slowly, "was entirely your idea, Laura, not mine. You desperately wanted to put your fake commitment in permanent writing to show me you finally understood her pain." Mom's dry lips moved frantically, but absolutely no sound came out. "Did you intentionally lie to my face back then?" Grandma demanded. "Or did you simply forget your sacred promises the exact moment they became slightly inconvenient?" Aunt Penelope shook her head in total, unfiltered disgust. Uncle Richard gently set the papers down onto the table like they were physically burning his hands. The absolute truth was out, but the devastating fallout was about to tear the remaining shreds of this family entirely apart. Morgan sobbed openly now, dark mascara visibly streaking her pale cheeks. "Mom, how could you? You explicitly told me Alyssa truly didn't care about the car." I honestly thought Mom's voice finally broke through the deafening silence, sounding incredibly small and fragile. "I just thought it would be totally fine. She never ever complains. She never had to." Grandma's harsh words fell onto the polished table like a heavy wooden gavel. The final verdict was officially in. Morgan stood up abruptly. "Grandma, I swear on my life I absolutely didn't know." Her voice was raw, desperate to somehow salvage her pristine image. "Mom completely assured me Alyssa said yes. She insisted Alyssa thought it made much more logical sense for me to have it because of Evan." Grandma regarded her eldest, golden granddaughter without a single drop of warmth. "And you simply believed that ridiculous story without a single question?" "I did. Did you ever call your own sister, shoot her a quick text, send a tiny message asking how she actually felt about giving up her independence?" Morgan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You didn't," Grandma nodded slowly, the deep disappointment radiating from her bones. "Because it was vastly easier not to ask. It was easier to blindly accept whatever benefited your lifestyle, and happily assume everyone else was completely fine." David frantically tried to intervene. "Evelyn, surely we can calmly discuss this mess somewhere much more private." "Private?" Grandma's laugh was a razor-sharp blade. "Your lovely mother-in-law boldly announced Alyssa's fake generosity to every single person in this room. She made a loud public statement, a completely false one." She swept her piercing gaze across the 50 faces watching in stunned, absolute silence. "This cruel lie was made public, so it will be resolved entirely publicly. Laura deeply humiliated Alyssa in front of everyone she knows. The raw truth absolutely deserves the exact same audience." Several older relatives nodded in grim agreement. I saw Aunt Penelope's warm hand gently reach for mine under the table, squeezing tight. "Alyssa didn't give away a single thing." Grandma's voice rose, commanding the space. "She was brutally robbed by her own mother and older sister in broad daylight, and then loudly blamed for being upset about it." That was the absolute breaking point for David. He looked from Grandma's furious, righteous face to Mom's pale, guilty one, and finally turned to his weeping wife. His heavy wooden chair scraped violently against the floorboards as he stood up, his handsome face twisting into a mask of pure, unfiltered disgust. "You lied straight to my face." David's voice shook with suppressed rage. "You swore to me. Alyssa offered it up. You confidently told me she didn't even want to drive anymore. Morgan reached out for his hand, blind panic filling her green eyes. David, please. You casually stole from your own little sister, just to cheaply impress my wealthy mother. He reached down, scooped little Evan right out of his high chair, and pulled the confused toddler fiercely against his broad chest. I am absolutely not sitting at a dinner table with common thieves. I'll wait out in the lobby. Without another word or backward glance, David turned his stiff back on Morgan and marched straight out of the dining room. Morgan let out a choked, devastated wail. Her flawless, picture-perfect life was violently fracturing right in front of our eyes. Alyssa, I am so incredibly sorry. Morgan turned to me, salty tears flowing freely down her chin. I really am. I should have just asked you. For the very first time that entire evening, I saw something truly genuine reflecting in my sister's face. It wasn't the usual entitled assumption I had grown so used to. It was something vastly closer to deep, agonizing shame. I didn't respond. I couldn't yet. Mostly because Grandma was already reaching out for one final devastating document, and I knew we weren't entirely done. Grandma rose from her chair again. Standing at the head of that massive long table in her elegant navy dress, she looked exactly like a powerful queen about to deliver an unstoppable royal decree. Here is exactly what will happen. Her tone left absolutely no room for any negotiation. The stolen car will be officially returned to Alyssa tonight, right before anyone leaves this restaurant. Mom's head snapped up in horror. Tonight. But Morgan needs to figure out her own personal transportation like every other functioning adult. Grandma barked, turning her fiery gaze to my sister. Morgan, hand over the keys. Right now. For a tense heartbeat, I honestly thought Morgan would stubbornly argue. Her jaw visibly tightened. Then, she reached a trembling hand deep into her designer purse and pulled out a familiar silver keychain. My keychain, the exact one bearing the small silver compass charm I had happily bought at a sunny flea market the very week I got the RAV4. She walked slowly toward my end of the table, each step looking incredibly heavy. I'm sorry, Alyssa. Her voice was barely a raspy whisper. I really am. She gently placed the cold keys directly into my open palm. The solid metal was warm from her bag. That familiar comforting weight. My keys. My car. Mine again. Thank you, I said quietly. Just 2 simple words. That was all my exhausted lungs could manage. Grandma nodded, deeply satisfied. And Laura, she sharply turned her attention back to my mother. You owe your youngest daughter a massive apology. Not just for the vehicle, for the horrible way you've constantly treated her, for making her feel completely invisible in her own family. Mom stood completely rigid, her face a messy battlefield of ugly emotions, bitter shame, hot anger, stubborn defiance, and finally, cold fear. Laura, Grandma's voice hardened into granite. 50 people collectively held their breath. My mother, for perhaps the very first time in her controlling life, had absolutely nowhere left to hide. Her face had turned the dark color of an old brick, flushed, mottled, and barely contained. Alyssa, the single word came out incredibly tight, painfully forced through gritted teeth. I apologize. I definitely should have asked you before letting Morgan use the vehicle. That was it, an incredibly thin, weak technical admission, nothing genuine, nothing real. Grandma's sharp eyes narrowed dangerously. That is your grand apology for 4 full weeks of blatant theft? For aggressively lying to everyone sitting here? For publicly humiliating your own flesh and blood in front of her entire extended family? I said I was sorry, Mom snapped defensively. You said empty words, Grandma countered. There is a massive difference. The thick tension hanging in the room was physically unbearable. I could actually hear someone's wristwatch ticking loudly 3 seats away. But something profound and permanent had shifted deep inside my soul during the past hour. I had quietly watched my mother effortlessly lie, aggressively deflect, ruthlessly attack, and finally squirm pathetically under the crushing weight of the truth. I had clearly seen exactly who she truly was, and I suddenly realized I didn't actually need a genuine apology from her anymore. I just needed ironclad boundaries. Mom. I stood up tall, my keys clutched fiercely in my right hand. I accept your apology. A brief flash of massive relief flickered across her sweaty face. But I need you to clearly understand something moving forward. I kept my voice perfectly steady, highly professional. It was the exact tone I effectively used with incredibly difficult freelance clients. From now on, any single decision that involves me, my personal property, or my life, you ask me directly. Not through Morgan. Not through Dad. Me. Alyssa, you do not decide for me anymore. I held her panicked gaze, refusing to blink or back down. I am not the flexible one anymore. I am not the convenient backup option. I am your daughter, and I absolutely deserve to be asked. The grand room was dead silent. Grandma watched me with a beautiful expression I'd never once seen directed at me before. Unconditional, glowing pride. "That's my brave granddaughter," she said softly. And for the very first time in 26 years, I truly felt like I firmly existed in this family as a real solid person. But Grandma wasn't quite finished. She patiently waited until I sat back down, then addressed the quiet room again. "There is one final matter to properly discuss tonight." Mom groaned out loud, actually groaning like a scolded, petulant teenager. "The Miller Family Trust," Grandma announced, folding her hands neatly. "As most of you know, your grandfather established this massive financial trust right before he passed away. It was deeply meant to help the future generations of our family thrive." Nods went around the long table. This was standard, common knowledge. Until now, I have faithfully distributed these trust funds strictly through my 3 children, Laura, Richard, and Penelope. They submitted formal requests on behalf of their growing families, and I either approved or denied them. She paused, deliberately letting the heavy words settle into the quiet air. "That broken system officially ends today." Mom's head snapped up so fast I thought her neck might break. "What? From this point forward, I will work directly with each and every grandchild. No more sneaky intermediaries. No more biased parents unfairly deciding who actually deserves what." Her wise gaze swept the long table, landing on each younger cousin in turn. "You are all capable adults. You can speak clearly for yourselves." Uncle Richard nodded slowly, absorbing the blow. "That seems extremely fair. More than fair." Aunt Penelope quickly agreed, a victorious smile playing on her lips. "But Mom looked exactly like she had been violently slapped across the face. "Mother, you simply can't just— The massive trust has always been managed strictly through us." Grandma's silver eyebrow rose in silent challenge. "So you could selfishly decide which of your daughters actually deserves financial support. So you could secretly take large sums of money specifically meant for Alyssa and illegally redirect it to Morgan, simply because you arbitrarily deemed her more worthy?" Mom had absolutely no response. Her mouth hung open. "I've carefully watched exactly how you treat your children, Laura. All of you." Grandma's booming voice carried to every dark corner. "And I've finally decided that my precious grandchildren absolutely deserve vastly better than being unfairly filtered through their parents' toxic favoritism." Morgan and I briefly exchanged a shocked glance across the table. It was brief, deeply uncertain, but incredibly meaningful. The entire power structure of our family had just violently shifted forever, and Mom was no longer the almighty gatekeeper. But even with her heavy crown totally stripped away, I knew my mother would never go down without trying to plant one final desperate trap for me in the near future. Wow. I still vividly remember the crushing, breathless silence in that grand room right after Grandma dropped that final bomb. If you are watching this video and quietly thinking about your own messy family dynamics, who secretly holds the power, who selfishly makes the big decisions, who constantly gets pushed aside into the cold shadows, I would truly love to hear your honest thoughts. What would you have done in my exact position? Would you have finally roared, or would you have stayed quiet? Drop a comment below and let me know. Also, please subscribe if you want to see more real stories just like this. I post new ones every single week. Now let me tell you exactly what happened right after we finally escaped that stifling restaurant. The tense party officially ended barely 30 minutes after Grandma's massive announcement. Not officially, of course. Nervous people still ate dry cake, awkwardly sang a hollow happy birthday, and posed for stiff fake photos. But the real energy had entirely drained from the room, just like air hissing from a punctured balloon. Mom and Dad practically fled first, barely muttering a quick goodbye to anyone. Morgan and David followed shortly after. Little Evan was fast asleep, his tiny head resting heavily against David's broad shoulder. Morgan paused at the heavy oak doors, looked back at me through the crowd, and silently mouthed, "I'm sorry." I gave a single firm nod. It wasn't instant forgiveness. It was just an acknowledgement that the war was finally over. Aunt Penelope found me standing alone out in the chilly parking lot. I was leaning gently against my green crossover, blindly running my shaking fingers along the smooth, cold metal of the door handle. "It's actually mine again. They can't take it." "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked softly. "I honestly don't know." I let out a weak, exhausted laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Is this what normal actually feels like? I've been invisible for so incredibly long I completely forgot how to breathe." She stepped forward and pulled me into a fierce, tight hug. It was warm and fiercely protective, the exact kind of loving embrace I had completely stopped expecting from my own blood. You did the absolute right thing tonight, standing up for yourself. That took massive courage. Grandma did most of the heavy lifting, I mumbled into her shoulder. She brilliantly set the entire stage. She set the stage, yes. Penelope gently pulled back, holding my shoulders firmly. But you bravely walked right onto it. I'm so proud of you, Alyssa. And I'm incredibly proud of the strong woman you're quickly becoming. Uncle Richard warmly shook my hand right before he headed to his sedan. Welcome to the club, he said with a wry, knowing smile. The not the favorite club. Our weekly meetings are on Thursdays. I laughed. A real genuine sound, for the absolute first time all night. Grandma was the very last person to stroll out of the restaurant. She walked incredibly slowly, but her steps were solid and completely steady, casually waving away multiple offers of help. Drive incredibly safe, sweetheart, she said, reaching up to gently pat my tear-stained cheek. Grandma, thank you, for absolutely everything. Don't thank me. Her wise eyes twinkled brightly under the harsh parking lot lights. Just promise me you will absolutely never be flexible again. I promise. I drove home completely alone that glorious night. The car windows were rolled all the way down, the crisp autumn wind whipping my hair. My favorite music blasted from the speakers. Mine. This life is finally mine. 3 entire weeks passed in thick, uncomfortable silence. No demanding calls from Mom. No complaining texts from Morgan. Dad sent one incredibly awkward message. Hope you're doing okay. I simply responded to that with a generic thumbs-up emoji. Then, on a quiet Thursday evening, Mom finally called. I sat perfectly still on my couch, staring at her glowing name on my phone screen for 4 full agonizing rings before swiping answer. Alyssa. Her tone was carefully neutral, heavily guarded. I really think we should talk. Okay. I just don't want this entire family to completely fall apart over a silly piece of metal. She sighed heavily, playing the exhausted victim once again. It was just a giant misunderstanding. Can we please just move past it? A misunderstanding. You literally forged my consent. You know exactly what I mean. She pushed on. Things just got totally out of hand. I really shouldn't have brought it up at the party, and neither should your grandmother. I sat there carefully noticing every single thing she purposely didn't say. No real acknowledgement of what she actually did wrong. No verbal recognition that she had maliciously stolen from me and lied to everyone. Mom, I'm completely willing to talk, but you really need to understand. Good. She quickly cut me off, her voice suddenly sharpening with hidden intent. Actually, right before we meet up, I desperately wanted to ask you something. Here it comes. I braced myself. Has Grandma talked to you privately about the family trust? Her true motives spilled out. About what she specifically plans to do now that she's managing the massive accounts directly. There it was, the absolute, undeniable real reason for her sudden phone call. If you desperately want to know about the money, ask Grandma yourself. I'm asking you, Alyssa, has she said anything about future plans for the grandchildren, about monthly distributions? My chest violently tightened with a very old, deeply familiar disappointment. She hasn't changed. She never will. Mom, if the only real reason you're calling me tonight is to secretly find out if I'm getting a check from Grandma, then this conversation is completely over. I kept my voice perfectly steady, totally empty of the rage that used to rule me. When you finally want to talk about what actually happened at that dinner, I'll be right here. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up the phone long before she could even formulate a response. I tossed the device onto the cushions. Some severely broken things I was quickly learning simply couldn't be magically fixed with a fake phone call. 2 full months after the explosive party, Morgan suddenly texted me. Not about cars, not about Grandma, or trusts or endless family drama. Just, can we please get coffee? I really need to talk. Like really talk. I deeply hesitated. A huge part of me just wanted to completely ignore it, to fiercely protect the quiet peace I had finally found. But another, much quieter part of my soul remembered that Morgan hadn't actively chosen to be the golden favorite any more than I had chosen to be the invisible shadow. We were both just playing the twisted roles Mom had assigned us. We met at a tiny quiet cafe right near my apartment building. Morgan arrived looking completely exhausted. Dark, heavy circles shadowed her green eyes. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy, rushed ponytail. She looked absolutely nothing like the perfectly polished, flawless older sister I had grown up fiercely envying. Thanks for meeting me, she whispered, wrapping her shaking hands tightly around her warm coffee cup. I honestly wasn't sure you would ever speak to me again. I wasn't entirely sure either, I admitted flatly. We sat in heavy silence for a long moment, listening to the espresso machine's hiss in the background. I've been thinking a whole lot since that awful party. Morgan finally forced the painful words out. About absolutely everything. About how I never ever questioned things. About how I just blindly took whatever was handed to me. Morgan, let me finish, please. Her tired eyes met mine, filled with genuine regret. I was always the absolute priority. I got way too used to it. I never once stopped to think about how incredibly awful that felt for you. She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Mom made it so incredibly easy not to think. She handled everything, made all the big decisions, told me exactly what to believe. And you chose to believe her. I did, simply because it was convenient for me. Hot tears gathered and fell. I'm not blaming Mom for my own actions anymore. I'm a grown adult. I definitely should have asked you about the car, about everything. I felt something massive and solid finally shift inside my chest. It wasn't instant, magical forgiveness. It was something vastly more fragile but deeply real. I don't need you to be completely perfect, Morgan. The honest words came slowly. I just need you to ask me, to actually see me. That's absolutely all I've ever wanted. She reached across the tiny wooden table and grabbed my hand tightly. I'm trying, Alyssa. I really am. I knew it wasn't a total fix, but it was a beautiful start. 7 wonderful months later, my relationship with Grandma Evelyn had completely transformed. Every single Sunday afternoon, I happily drove my crossover. My beautiful crossover, with its tiny silver compass charm proudly dangling from the keychain, straight back to her lovely house. Not secretly like I used to. Openly, proudly. We would sit for hours in her blooming garden, or her sunny warm kitchen, drinking sweet tea she stubbornly insisted on brewing the proper old-fashioned way. She would tell me fascinating stories about Grandpa, about their wild early years together, about the entire family long before things got so deeply complicated and toxic. You know exactly why you are my absolute favorite, Alyssa, she asked one sunny afternoon, carefully pruning her giant red rose bushes with silver shears. Because I actually bring you good pastries. I laughed warmly. Because you remind me exactly of me. Her raspy voice suddenly softened, drifting into the past. I was the flexible one too. The youngest, quietest girl in a loud house completely full of demanding brothers. I quickly learned to be entirely invisible, to just politely take whatever scraps were given, and absolutely never ask for more. She gently touched a blooming white rose, adjusting its fragile position toward the warm sun. Your grandfather was the very first person on earth who actually saw me. He told me I was completely wasting my beautiful life being so small. She smiled, totally lost in a sweet memory. He made me swear to absolutely never shrink myself again. I sat back, thinking about all the painful years I'd spent shrinking, constantly making myself tiny so others could feel massive. I really wish someone had told me that much sooner, I whispered. Grandma turned to me, her ancient eyes burning bright with love. I am telling you right now. She reached out and squeezed my hand with surprising strength. I desperately wish I'd had someone fiercely fighting in my corner sooner. That's exactly why I am forever in yours. I hugged her right then, properly, tightly, exactly the way I should have hugged her for years. Thank you, Grandma, for literally everything. Don't thank me, she gently patted my back. Just keep being exactly who you are. That is absolutely all the thanks I will ever need. Some vital life lessons take 75 long years to finally teach, but trust me, they are worth every single agonizing moment of waiting. So where do things currently stand now? My relationship with Mom is highly complicated. We occasionally talk, but I guard myself carefully. She finally knows there are hard lines she absolutely cannot cross anymore. Sometimes I catch fleeting, sad glimpses of the wonderful mother I always wished she'd been. Tiny moments of genuine, unforced warmth that make my heart ache and wonder what could have been different. But I no longer sit around and wait for her to magically change. I've completely stopped expecting her to ever see me the way I desperately needed to be seen. Morgan and I are slowly, carefully rebuilding. She's actually learning to ask me things before blindly assuming, and I'm slowly learning to trust that she genuinely wants to know the answer. We will probably never be incredibly close the way some lucky sisters are, but we are finally honest with each other now, and that is vastly more than we ever had growing up. Dad just stays perfectly neutral, completely avoiding conflict, which is its own cowardly kind of choice. I've quietly accepted that deeply flawed fact about him. And Grandma taught me the single most important lesson of my entire existence. Being flexible absolutely does not mean being invisible. Keeping the fake peace does not mean you have to lose your own soul. I am 27 years old now. I have my own cozy apartment, my successful freelance job, and my gorgeous green car with its little silver compass charm. I have my wonderful weekly teas with a fierce 75-year-old warrior who absolutely refuses to let me shrink into the shadows. I am not the flexible one anymore. I am the strong one with unbreakable boundaries. That is where my story pauses. If you are watching this right now, and you find yourself painfully stuck in a dynamic that constantly overlooks you, endlessly takes from you, and expects you to always be the one who quietly bends, I need you to know something. You have the absolute right to proudly say no. You have the fierce, undeniable right to boldly take up massive space in your own beautiful life. Sometimes it takes an emotionally driven, intense journey like this one to finally see the truth in our own reflections. If this fast-paced ride through my family's chaotic unraveling resonated with the quiet battles you fight behind closed doors, I want you to know you are absolutely not alone. There is profound power in sharing these raw, undeniable truths. If you found a piece of your own voice in my grandmother's fire or in my hard-won independence, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I share deep, high-stakes stories like this every single week, narratives designed to remind you of your own strength and help you fiercely stand your ground. Drop a comment below and tell me what firm boundary did this journey inspire you to set today. Stay connected, keep your boundaries ironclad, and until next time, take amazing care of yourself. You completely deserve it.